Okay.
Oscar, stop. I'm going to put myself on mute because he's just wanting to be with everybody and he can't be with Harrison.
Okay. This is Psalm 100. Make a joyful shout to the Lord, all you lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before his presence with singing. Know that the Lord, he is God. It is he who has made us, and not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. Be thankful to him and bless his name. For the Lord is good, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endures to all generations. God, we thank you for that, and we acknowledge what a wonderful way to start a period of time where we focus on your word and your message to us. And help us to keep in mind and to share with all others that you are the God of all. And let us celebrate you and acknowledge you and worship you and thank you for all your generosity in our lives. And it's in Jesus' mighty name we pray these things. Amen. All right, well, last time we were in 47. And if you remember the second part, particular of chapter 47 of Genesis, and Joseph, we picked up where Joseph, did what he had said he would do. He had settled his brothers and his father and their families into the portion of Goshen, that plentiful, fruitful area, and and while that had happened, remember Jacob had kind of taken charge of the situation after meeting Pharaoh and just blessed him. And Jacob had made a very serious and important confession. He confessed that, despite his many lengthy years, they weren't as long as his dad or his grandfather, and he hadn't lived a very obedient, righteous life to God. And it was a really important admission, and we see that. And here they are in Egypt, and they're starting to settle down, and we see Jacob that in humility is saying, look, I'm not what I should have been, right? And then, during the rest of the chapter as we move forward, we saw the Egyptians, the famine was so severe. We had said that the story was going to switch back to the conclusion of the famine, and that the famine had been so severe that the Egyptians had sold virtually everything, including their lands, their animals. They were slaves to Pharaoh. Everything. That at the end of the famine, Joseph was now giving them seed to sow, but still the Egyptians would owe 1/5 of the harvest to Pharaoh. And when we discussed that, Marie made a really good point. Hey, look, 1/5 was a lot less than what the typical, non-believing country back in those days would give. They sometimes had to give 4/5, and they got to keep a fifth. Okay. And you can argue, well, why would Joseph even make them pay Pharaoh? Well, it's Pharaoh's land now. They had sold it to him. They're sharecroppers essentially. They're doing Pharaoh's land for him, and Pharaoh is allowing him, through Joseph, that is, to keep the 20%. To keep the 80%, but Pharaoh wanted the 20% from everybody. And we had talked about how God had made Pharaoh rich through Joseph, and we reflected back on the original promise that God had made to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. We saw that even as the famine was raging, that section of chapter 47 started with, we're talking about how well things went for Israel in the land of Goshen, and ended the exact same way. That thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt and the land of Goshen, and they gained possession in it, and they were fruitful, and they multiplied greatly. And We noted that, they're gaining property while the Egyptians are being forced to sell property and livestock, and they've got their livestock, and now they're taking care of Pharaoh's livestock, which is all the livestock that Joseph is buying. So they're taking care of everything. In fact, it's been estimated that, if 70 people came down to Egypt and they increased the population just 5%, that's 5 new babies every year out of every 100 people, 5% per year for 400 years, that would have made them over 2 million people strong. Okay, now I haven't done the math to confirm that, but I'll just assume that that's true. And we talked about the fact how consistent this was with the plan that Abraham had been told by God over 200 years before that. In Genesis 15, that God had told Abraham, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that's not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. Okay? But we also needed to be reminded that, it wasn't God that put them in slavery. We just talked about the fact that when God brought them down there, he put them into a situation where they prospered. Even while others were struggling with famine, God protected them and they prospered. It wasn't until Joseph dies and then a new Pharaoh arises that man put and subjugated the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham, into slavery. That was man's doing. That wasn't God's doing. And we see this in the very beginnings of Exodus. Sometimes it helps just to see how stories continue from one to the next when there is a continuation, like from Genesis to Exodus. And we read, then Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and, if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh's store cities, Phitcom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of these people of Israel. And that's from Exodus chapter 1, 6 through 12. So we see that stage has been really set, okay? That Jacob said, hey, look, I've gotten old, but I'm near the end of my life. And so the very end part of chapter 47 is Jacob calling Joseph to him and making him promise that when he dies, that he'll carry his bones back. And it was so important that Jacob made him promise twice, okay? And we talked about why this was so important. Because God had promised Jacob as well as Abraham, hey, your descendants will be coming back, okay? And then we spent a lot of time talking about the fact that, Jacob truly appears to be a changed man here, and how impressive it is given how long he rebelled against God and really insisted on doing things his own way. And that it was really a marvelous story of faith. Now, as we move into 48 and then 49 as well, we'll continue to see this change Jacob, this change in faith, this focus on God to the point where he starts to prophesy for God, okay? And what we see in chapters 48 and 49 are really the epilogue, if you will, kind of to the story, okay? The whole story, the famine and everything, that's all resolved now. We've seen how that ends. Pharaoh has control of everything. He's become exceedingly powerful. That's why he's able to enslave the Jews years from now. But what happens now is to the rest of the patriarch, and it's an epilogue in the sense that through the prophesying of Jacob on behalf of God, we'll see the destiny of Israel being unfolded. Okay, of the 12 tribes, technically 13, but of the 12 tribes, as they're typically called, and we'll see how the nature of the sons is reflected through that history to a degree. Okay, and so in other words, this is the beginning of Israel itself, and how it's proclaimed and ordained by God. All right, so as I said, the remaining chapters, are closing scenes of the times of the patriarch, and then the forecasting of the time of Israel. Jacob has become this real man of God, and he's going to start this prophesying. So why don't we start reading in chapter 48? Maya, will you read 1 through 4, please, for us?
Sure. Sometime later, Joseph was told, "Your father is ill." So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, along with him. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to you," Israel rallied his strength and sat up on the bed. Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, 'I am going to make you fruitful and will increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land to you. I will give this land as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you.'"
And Marie, how about 5 through 9, please?
"And now your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. Your offspring, whom you beget after them, shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. But as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died beside me in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was but a little distance to go to Ephraim, and I buried her there on the way to Ephraim, that is Bethlehem. Then Israel saw Joseph's son and said, 'Who are these?' Joseph said to his father, 'They are my sons, whom God has given me in this place.' And he said, 'Please bring them to me, and I will bless them.'"
Thank you. And Maya, how about 9 through 14?
Okay. That they are the sons God has given me here, Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said to them, "Bring them to me so I may bless them." Now Israel's eyes were failing because of his old age, and he could hardly see. So Joseph brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too." Then Joseph removed them from Israel's knees and bowed down with his face to the ground. And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim on his right toward Israel's left, and Manasseh on his left toward Israel's right hand, and brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn.
And Marie, will you take us through, I guess through 19?
Okay. "And he blessed Joseph and said, 'God before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked, the God who has fed me all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. Let my name be named upon them, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth.' Now then Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim. It displeased him, so he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, 'Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head.' But his father refused and said, 'I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations.'"
Okay. All right. So, as I said, this actually begins the blessings, the closing out of this period, if you will, of the history of Israel. And it literally, it's the beginning of the closing of the book of Genesis, the book of the beginnings. Okay? And again, I think as we get near here, it's useful for you in your own time to think through how it began, the major themes, the story we've talked about, and we may very well do a lesson where we sit down and just talk about it ourselves, but before we're done with Genesis. But we see here this is the closing, and what's happening is Jacob has gotten old, and he has Joseph come to him, and he's going to have what appears to be a private blessing with with Joseph and Joseph's sons, and then in chapter 49, all of the sons either come or join or whatever, and he blesses them. He gives blessings to the rest of them. Now, keep in mind as a backlog as we go through this that remember, the blessings that Isaac gave Jacob. First of all, Jacob had misled Isaac. Isaac was going blind, and he had misled Jacob to get the blessing. And then Esau had come and wanted a blessing, and Isaac's like, well, what do I have left for you? And so he prophesied and blessed him, but it wasn't the greatest of blessings. Hey, you'll be a nation, lots of people, but you're going to, live in the deserts, and you're going to be difficult for your brothers and things like that. I don't remember all the details of it. I didn't go look it up beforehand. But keep in mind that this is the same thing. This is the next generation, if you will, passing the torch. And there's some similarities and there are a few differences here. Verse 1, as I said, Joseph is told Jacob's old, your father is sick, and so he took his sons Manasseh and Ephraim to come visit him. Now, as I said earlier, remember, we know that when he first moves down there, Jacob tells Pharaoh he's 130. And we're also told he lived 17 years in the land of Egypt. So Jacob now is 147 years old, and he is indeed approaching the end of his life. And notice Joseph's immediate response. I mean, he doesn't hesitate. He's remained attentive to his father. He's remained concerned and loving of his father. And he immediately comes to see his father. And I don't think he's surprised to find out that this is near the end. Okay. Now, by the way, we also know Joseph is likely 56 at this time, which also gives us an indication that his kids, Manasseh and Ephraim, are probably in their 20s. Okay. And as I said, there's no mention of the other brothers being present. Just Joseph and the two sons. Now, obviously, the other brothers hear about this or are told about it somewhere, somehow. But regardless, they're not here at this particular point in time. Verse 2, when it was told to Jacob, behold, your son Joseph has come, you notice it's Israel collected his strength and sat up in bed. It is interesting to notice that Jacob is making himself presentable to Joseph when Joseph arrives. Okay, Jacob is getting old, but again, remember, Joseph is representing and foreshadowing a Jesus here, and so here we see Jacob making himself presentable to Joseph, and Joseph, of course, is the power of Egypt, but I think it's a lot more than that. There's a lot of spirituality going on in this chapter. If you try to read it through physical eyesight, a lot of it's going to be meaningless, but when you start to push it into a spiritual realm consistent with everything, and I don't mean just make it up as you go, but consistent with everything we've read so far in Genesis, okay, you'll start to see that it makes a whole lot more sense here. Okay, so Joseph arrives, and Jacob makes himself presentable. Sits up in bed, and Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz, in the land of Canaan and blessed me. Now, to me, that's a really important statement because what we're seeing is an insight into how Jacob now sees things relative to how he originally did. He says, God appeared to me and blessed me, but at the time, Jacob appeared to have a very different view of things. In fact, back in Genesis chapter 28, in verses 19 through 29, we read when we were there, he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz, as at first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, in other words, where I decide to go, this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I again come to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be of God's house. And all that you have given me, I will give you a tenth to you. And it was a conditional sounding sort of promise. It's almost it was essentially as if Jacob was attempting to make a conditional deal with God. You do what I say, you take care of me, you did say you were going to do it, so you do it my way, everything else, and then, then I'll let you be my God. Instead of Jacob saying, hey, let me just revel in the fact that you know who I am and you came to visit me and you promised blessings. No, Jacob was still trying to dictate what those blessings would be like. He wants to be in control. And we probably talked about this. I didn't go back and check my notes. I would assume we did. But, the question really should be asked, even again here now, which are we? Are we one that says, well, God, thank you for the blessings, but here's how I want them? Or are we ones who are just simply saying, God's blessing me, and that's enough. That's all I need. It's interesting to note that although Joseph has walked with God and been blessed by him, there's actually no record of God ever appearing to Joseph or directly talking with him.
Then what is the brainwave? How does he know the answers to Pharaoh's dream and crap?
Yeah, he's just led by the Spirit, I guess.
Okay.
But notice that this is important, and I would submit to you that this is one of the ways we know the period of the patriarchs is ending, because the torch here is being passed to Joseph and his family, okay? But Joseph doesn't have that. He walks with the Lord. He has a strong relationship with God. He's a man of God. Pharaoh's noticed it. The prison keeper noticed it. Potiphar noticed it. Everybody sees it and notices it, but God has never spoken directly to him. Okay? And so this is a distinction. This is the end of the patriarchs, okay, if you will. He's never really talked with him as he did with the patriarchs, okay. So he's telling Joseph, "Hey, God Almighty appeared to me in Luz at the time I was leaving the land, and said He would protect me and bless me." And then in verse 4 he goes on to say, "And He said, behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession." So he's reciting the promise that God made to him, at least in part. I mean, it's not a complete quote. In fact, the quote from chapter 28, 13, 14 is this. This is the exact promise. "And behold, the Lord stood above it and said," that ladder, remember, "and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, to the east, to the south, to the north. And in you and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed." And that was a repeat, we noted, probably, of Genesis chapter 17 and so many other places where God had promised in this particular case to Abraham, I will make you exceedingly fruitful. I will make you into a nations and kings, and shall come from you, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you and throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring after you. And that was in Genesis 17, 6 and 7. But it's repeated in essence in so many other places, to Abraham and to Isaac, and then to Jacob. And Jacob here is telling Joseph, or probably reminding him, Joseph has probably heard family stories, this is what happened. God did this. When I left the land, he blessed me, and this is what he promised me. Now, why is he doing this? Why is he doing this? We'll look at verses 5 and 6. Now, your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine. Ephraim.
Yeah, what does it mean there is? Like, he wants to be the...
Yeah, hang on there. I'll get to that in a second. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. Now, by the way, it's interesting to note, Reuben and Simeon, do you happen to remember what birth order they were of Jacob's kids? First and second. Yeah, first and second. He's saying, your 2 will be no different than my first 2. Okay, now this is part of the way, this is one of the places where I say, if you look about this from a physical point of view, this makes like no sense. It's a dotty old guy saying, no, give me your kids, I'm claiming them. And I have to tell you the truth, when I was first a believer and I first read these verses, I thought, that's exactly what's happening. What is this old guy doing? Grabbing his grandsons and saying, they're mine, they're mine, they're mine. You know, I mean, come on. It's like, you know, this is ridiculous. But there's a spiritual essence of what's happening here that you have to realize, that is not what's going on. The reason he just got done telling the story to Joseph about how he received the birthrights and the blessings from God. And remember, when we'd gone through that passage and God had made that promise to him, we had said God was affirming the blessings that even a deceived Isaac had given to Joseph. Remember, Isaac was deceived. Jacob, sorry. Isaac was deceived. He gave the blessings to Jacob. Then Esau got upset. He blessed him, like I said earlier. Jacob comes back, and his mother tells him, you got to leave, and his father says, go forth and do all these great things, and essentially repeats the blessing. And early in the trip, first night out, God comes and affirms the birthright and the blessings to Jacob. Jacob is saying, this is my right now to give to you. See, God gave them to me, and I'm now passing it on to you. Remember what the birthright was. It was the right of the first son to what? A double portion of the inheritance. By saying, your sons are like mine, he's giving Joseph a double portion of the inheritance by default. Because he's going to break the inheritance up equally among the sons, but Joseph doesn't get anything. But in his family tree, his sons are treated like Jacob's sons, like his own brothers. And so Joseph essentially gets the double portion. Jacob is giving him the birthright. Okay? The second to youngest son is getting the birthright. Okay? And Jacob has set this up by saying, God gave it to me, now I'm passing it down to you. It is time to pass it on. Okay, that's exactly what's going on here. Okay? And that's why he started by saying this. So when Jacob adopts Joseph's first 2 sons, that's how he gives the double portion to Joseph. Now Joseph is known throughout the land. He's the second most powerful man in Egypt. You remember, he's adopted all the lineage, all the vestiges, everything else of the Egyptians. He's shaved. He doesn't look like a Jew. He's got an Egyptian wife. He's got Egyptian named boys and all this kind of, and all these things. He's wealthy, wealthy, wealthy in his own right. He doesn't need this. So Jacob gets around this all and does not make it look weird by now making it clearly known Joseph is really a Hebrew by just giving it to his sons. It's really very clever. And it's a way that he gives his birthright to that son that always obeyed him, who never committed any of those sons, okay, or those sins like the other brothers. Okay, this is why, as you read on through the history of Israel, why there are separate and equal tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim, and you never, ever, ever read of a tribe of Joseph. Well, there is one place where you read of it in Revelation, but we're not going to go into that. But really, there's no real place where there's a tribe of Joseph mentioned, because it's not. Okay, so technically there's 13 tribes. Okay, it's interesting that there's 13 tribes and everybody refers to them as 12 tribes because of the 12 brothers. But from a blessing point of view, what's happening is Joseph's blessings, Joseph's inheritance are being doubled, and they're immediately going to his sons. Okay, and Jacob says, I'm not taking away your right of fatherhood. You can do what you want with what you have with your sons. You have any sons after this, do what you want with them. But these two are going to be treated like mine. Okay? So here comes the double blessing, the double portion. Now notice this is the birthright, and we talked earlier about the difference between the birthright and the blessings. The birthright was the inheritance, typically to the oldest son, that he would be the patriarch, the leader. He would have the ability and the resources to be that leader, the power of the family. Okay, he's putting that into Joseph's family, but he's not giving him the final blessing. That blessing, actually, with the promise of the coming Messiah in chapter 49, is going to go to Judah. So here, interestingly enough, Jacob will separate the birthright that goes to Joseph from the blessing of the Messiah and the leadership of Israel to Judah. So don't get that confused. We'll see that when we get to chapter 49. Okay. So a lot to just keep in mind there, because it's not the way we would typically think of things. But that's what's going on now. In verse 8. After Jacob has now announced to Joseph what he's doing, okay, so he's made his intentions very clear. Joseph gets it, okay. Now Israel, notice it's Israel, saw Joseph's sons, and he said, who are these? And Joseph said to his father, these are my sons, whom God has given me here. So he said, bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. And in verse 10 we read, now the eyes of Israel were so dim from his age that he could not see. Now there's some interesting things we got to talk about before we move forward here. First is Jacob's eyesight is failing. Who else's eyesight failed, right?
Oh, the other guy's fathers, when they
Isaac, yeah, right? And when Isaac's eyesight was failing, Jacob deceived his father. Now that was the beginning. That was a really notable shift downward in the family tree from the following of God and God's ways, and they're falling away from God. And here we see it's a beautiful picture, if you will. How things have changed so dramatically in one generation. Joseph isn't going to try to deceive his father at all. Okay, but here's Jacob, and isn't it ironic that Jacob, the one who took advantage of his father's failing eyesight to deceive him, now has his eyesight failing, and yet relies on the honesty of his son, right, Joseph. What a change in where this generation has gone. This is what God has done through the difficulties that he's allowed them all to go through. And we may have wondered at times, why would God allow such difficult? Look what it's gotten to. We don't always see in our lives how God is molding and changing and redirecting and refining us. But over time, it becomes evident. I know I've told you guys this before. I tell this to many different groups. I'll say it again. Do not measure your progress in your Christian walk day by day or week by week or even month by month or year by year. Man, you're setting yourself up for disappointment when you do that, because we will all have ups and downs, hills and valleys. We're all like Jacob. We're going to have periods where we do a little bit better and then we fail again, and periods of we do it and then we fail again, and then we don't trust, and then we get depressed, and oh, woe is me, all these things are going against me. Even though God had told him 2 and 3 times, look, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to provide for you. Oh, woe is me, and we look at where you are today compared to where you were 3 years ago. Look at where you are today compared to where you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Maya, 25 years ago, would you have imagined me leading Bible studies like this?
No.
And doing them at work, and I've been doing them there at work now for, I think it's close to 12 or 15 years or something like that. And at church and working with the people dealing with substance abuse and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not the same person now. I may from year to year have a good year, a bad year, a good month, a bad month, whatever it is. But over 25 years, I've been progressing. And these are the times of ways you have to look at yourself. After all, look at how long Jacob struggled, and yet here he is doing so well. Okay. Now the other thing to keep in mind is, as I said, there's a lot of spirituality here. And when it says that Abraham's eyes were dim and he could not see, that is a comment about his physical eyesight. And yet what he's about to say makes it clear that he is mentally lucid in this old age, and he is walking in the spiritual sight of God. He may not be physically able to see, but this guy is sharp. And I think there's a reason why we read about this here is because in contrast to his failing eyesight, his spiritual eyesight is perfect. And this is, I think, one of God's ways of telling us, hey, what Jacob's about to say is prophetic. He's speaking for God. And it's going to apply here and through into chapter 49 when he blesses the other sons. Okay. Going back to the deceptions of Isaac when Jacob deceived him and used the failing eyesight to do it. We realize that this is one of the interesting things here. God had told, remember, Rebecca, Jacob's mother, hey, the older will serve the younger, okay? And it was predetermined by God. God knew Jacob would get the birthright and the blessing. And when God affirmed that to Jacob in that dream that he just referenced to Joseph, it wasn't that God was saying, okay, you deceived your father Isaac, but he gave you the blessing, so now I'm going to have to stick by his word and give it to you, so I affirm it. What he was really saying was, look, this was the plan all along. You didn't have to deceive him to get it. You would have had it by trusting in me. Okay? See, Isaac's failing eyesight was not really the reason Jacob was able to deceive his father. It wasn't that Jacob's plan was all that great or anything like that. God's plan was that Jacob would inherit the birthright and the blessing all along, because God knew his heart and he knew Esau's heart. God simply allowed Jacob the opportunity to demonstrate how evil his heart was at that time by deceiving Isaac rather than trusting God. That he allowed Jacob to demonstrate his own personality by resorting to deception rather than trusting in God, because God knew that over time that Jacob would become a man of God and that he would be where he is right now in this chapter 48 where we're reading about it. Okay? But this whole idea here is that we're going to get to is that here's evidence and proof that Jacob didn't need to do that. God was in charge all along. Okay? And Jacob didn't get the blessing and the birthright falsely. It was his because God would have given it to him regardless. All right, well, we read on in verse 9. Joseph said to his father, "These are my sons. Here they are. Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Like I said, Jacob has made his plan pretty clear. Now the eyes of them were dim. Joseph brought them close to them, and he kissed them and embraced them. In verse 11, Israel said to, again, Israel, see, he's in the spirit. He's walking with the Lord. Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face. Behold, God has let me see your children as well." What an amazing way to start. He began by saying, "God blessed me. He gave me this birthright, so it is mine to give to you now. It's the appropriate time." And as he's getting ready to start, he again acknowledges all of these things from God, and he specifically says, "Hey, the reason I got to see you again was because of God." And he not just fulfilled my desire to allow me to see you. I get to spend the last 17 years of my life with you, and I get to know your children as well. Isn't this just like God? To so amazingly exceed our expectations in ways that we don't even expect. We're sitting here praying, "Oh God, I need this, I need this, I need this, and I haven't gotten it, and you haven't answered me, and you haven't told me, and you haven't helped me." And then when the time is right, God so vastly exceeds what we even asked for or could have imagined. This is God's nature. This is God's way. And we're seeing it here. And here's this man, again, I keep going back to it because it's just so amazing to me how God has changed Jacob from this deceptive guy, okay, who struggled to do everything on his own, to have everything his way, to make sure everything was his, to do it by deceit, do it in any way he had to do it. And now here he is, he's just simply saying, "Look at how good God is. He not only fulfilled my desire, he gave me so much more." Now Jacob also gets to enjoy, besides knowing Joseph again and having him at the end of his life and the grandchildren and everything else, Jacob also gets some other gift here, which is he gets to know that Joseph, his son, has done so well. He's wealthy, he's powerful, he's wise. He's not a slave. He's not dead. He didn't meet some terrible fate. What a good God. What an incredible God. And like I say, we see his nature right here. Verse 13, Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand towards Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. Okay, so Manasseh's the firstborn, the oldest, and Joseph is expecting Jacob to give the blessing, the birthright, if you will, the birthright, down through Joseph's line to the oldest, to Manasseh. So Joseph steers the oldest son to Jacob's right hand, because the right hand is the right hand of preference, the right hand of power, through which the birthright will come. And Jacob has purposely crossed his hands. Okay? Verse 14 again, but Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was there, and crossing, and put his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was firstborn. Now, the language here, okay, is such that that there's no mistaking that Jacob did this intentionally. In fact, the New King James, the language there, the translation there is that Jacob guiding his hands knowingly. And that's the exact intent of the Hebrew language. Jacob didn't get confused. He wasn't blind. He's not out of it. Okay, the Hebrew makes it very clear. He intentionally put his right hand on the younger son, Ephraim's head. Okay. And then Joseph says in verse 15, verse 15, he blessed Joseph. He blessed Joseph, said, the God before whom my fathers and Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day. Now, remember how Jacob used to always refer to the God of Abraham and Isaac, but not really the God of him. Here, not only does he imply that it's his God, but he says, he's my shepherd. He's been my shepherd all of my life to this day. See, Jacob is seeing spiritually his whole life that despite his rebellion against God, that God has actually been with him and guiding him and taking care of him, just as he promised all of his life. We see so many of the promises of God that God has made to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and repeated through the generations being fulfilled and acknowledged here, that they've gone now to foreign land. But there's a bunch of them. Abraham, who couldn't have one son with Sarah, now has 70 descendants. Okay, I mean, that's a passel, but as I said earlier, they're going to grow to millions. Okay, different estimates about how big that is, but they're going to grow a lot bigger than that, and they're still around today, right? In the millions still. Okay, and he calls him my shepherd. Now, this is the first use of the term of shepherd for God in the Bible. And notice how it's in this idea of he shepherded me through all the evil of my life. He shepherded me and protected me. He watched over me even when I rebelled. It's very reminiscent of the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Okay, we see the echoes of it right here in Jacob's confession and blessing to Joseph, right? And he goes on to say in verse 16, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. Now, as I said, Jacob is seeing spiritually incredibly clearly. And he refers to this angel, and in the Hebrew it's malach, and it has to do with this idea of angel or messenger or representative. And when you go and you look at any conservative scholar or commentator, they're all going to almost uniformly recognize this as Jacob's acknowledgement of a theophany, or that is of a pre-incarnate God, okay, who presented himself to him. Remember, Jacob wrestled with him, okay. He's presented himself to Abraham. Remember when they had the discussion and they ate with him, and then they talked about Sodom and Gomorrah and all these kinds of things, okay. And of course, the angel who redeemed me from all evil, not only is that a clear reference to God, but who does it specifically refer to? Who's the Redeemer? Jesus. He's referring to Jesus Christ. Now, I don't know that he knows that, okay? But Jacob is praying that God will bless Manasseh and Ephraim and live in them and through him as he has in Jacob's life. And it's really interesting to notice that here in this prophetic section, in this end of Jacob's life, when he's starting to give these blessings to the next generation and in essence to all of Israel into the future, in a prophetic way, like I say, that all three members of the Trinity are acknowledged. Notice, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk. Okay, that's in verse 15. Well, who's the Father before they walked? God the Father. Okay, and the God which fed me in all the days of my life. Well, who's that? Okay, well, that's God the Spirit. Jesus taught us and made it very clear in the upper room. That's the role of the Spirit. He will protect you and walk with you and provide for you and educate you and teach you and grow you if you allow him to. And the angel who redeemed me from all evil, redeemed me from all evil. This is the Son. All three members, whether he recognized it at the moment or not, Jacob is saying, God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit have been active in my life to get me where I am. And he says, may they walk with your sons and bless them and lead them. This is so similar to what we read in the New Testament. It is phenomenal. Okay? And so with Jacob, by understanding and by implication to the promises in the New Testament, Jacob's prayer here and blessing for his grandsons is essentially what we get as Christians. Not because we're covered under the blessings of Jacob. We're not. We're not Jews. We're not in the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh. But because Jesus said, because we're adopted sons, we have a Father whom we walk with and who will be with us, and a Spirit who will provide and watch over and protect us, and a Son, Jesus himself, who redeemed us from the penalties of sin. He says, let this angel redeem me, bless the lads, and may my name live on in them, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the nations, all of which has exactly happened. Verse 17, then Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, and it displeased him, and he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. Joseph is concerned that Jacob has blessed Ephraim with his right hand and bestowed the birthright to him. Joseph, like all of us, is operating from a worldly expectation or a man-based view in this moment. Actually, not all that different than Isaac did. He felt Esau should get it because he was the oldest. He was the firstborn. And remember, Abraham at one point had said, "Oh Lord, look, I don't need a son through Sarah. Wouldn't it be sufficient? Wouldn't it be okay if Ishmael walked in your light?" Remember, and yet it was the second son of Abraham that got the birthright. Okay, God had another plan. And it's interesting here that Joseph, the one who's walked with God, actually takes a worldly perspective, thinking, oh, no, the birthright, put your right hand on the oldest. And Jacob, who is walking in spirit, says, no, son, I've got it right. Verse 19, but his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also will become a people, and he also will be great. However, the younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. Jacob makes it clear he understands exactly what he's doing, and he does not submit to Joseph's objections, that he's doing the right thing here. Now, in the case of all three patriarchs, like I said, in the calling of Abraham, okay, God chose selectively to pull Abraham, but Abraham wasn't the oldest brother, we don't think. Okay, in the calling of Shem over Jephthah, remember Noah's sons. Shem was not the oldest brother, Jephthah was. In the beginning of Genesis, in the calling of Abel over Cain, Abel wasn't the oldest one. Okay, God chose the younger over the oldest. And he does this again later on when we get to Moses. Aaron is the older brother, but he calls Moses. David is the youngest of 7 brothers, but he calls David. Solomon is one of the younger brothers of David, but Solomon is called to inherit the birthright. Okay, the youngest sons of their fathers. These were all the second or later sons, not the first ones yet. God called them, and here Manasseh will be great, but Ephraim the younger will be greater still. As we've talked about, men choose and base their choices on things they can observe and they can measure and they can understand. But God sees the heart. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I've refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." And that's in 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. Ephraim would become more numerous than Manasseh. You know, when they go through the desert wanderings, when they come into the land, the promised land under Joshua, Ephraim is a much more numerous and much more populous nation or tribe than Manasseh. Ephraim is the name God often uses to refer to specifically the northern 10 tribes after they separate into two nations. God frequently refers to the northern tribes, which were legally known as Israel. God refers to them as Ephraim. Okay, Manasseh, on the other hand, when they come into the land, Manasseh is going to choose to subdivide. Half of the nation is going to live to the east of the Jordan, and the half of the nation is going to choose to stay in the promised land. Ephraim's going to stay in the center, not far from northwest of Galilee. In fact, when the two nations separate, Samaria is in the middle of Ephraim. The capital of the northern tribe is going to be in the middle of Ephraim. Manasseh, on the other hand, would choose to live, as I said, partly separated. And that separation, where half of their tribe is outside the land and on the peripheral, will reduce their ability to influence and their ability to be a leader within the tribe of Israel. So Ephraim takes that leadership position historically, and so we see that Jacob was exactly right in his prophetic blessing here. Now, what's interesting in all this to me is as we go through this sense, we've now seen, we have a view into how God molded the nation of Israel. It's not just simply through trials that he lets them go through or where he doesn't let them go through. It's in how he selects their choices and their leaders. See, God is having a hand in this. And he says, this one's going to be the leader. That one will be the leader. And this is in part how he's molding these tribes, molding the future of Israel, molding this nation that he's pulling out, that ultimately he's going to say, here's your job. Now reveal me to the nations around me. Remember, this is the nation. God says, this is my nation. The natural nations turn from me. So I will pull one out that will represent me. And this is how I'm going to mold them. Okay? He chooses their leaders, and we see more of that actually in chapter 49. And isn't that exactly what he does today? He raises up people for whatever reason, Christian leaders sometimes and non-Christians sometimes, for his purposes, he raises up his church. He brings people into leaderships and for them to become leaders. See, through his providence, God is no less involved today in the affairs of the world than he was in the days of the patriarchs. So at the end of verse 19, he says, however, to the younger brother, he shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. Verse 20, he blessed them that day, saying, by you Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Verse 21, then Israel, still Israel, said to Joseph, behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you back to the land of your fathers. Now that's the greater you as well as the specific you, Joseph. Verse 22, I will give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the land of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. So Jacob reserves one last little blessing for Joseph. He says to Joseph, I'm about to die, but to you I'm going to give back, to the land of your fathers. I will give you one portion more than your brothers, the land which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. Now this creates a lot of controversy because, quite frankly, there's no record in Genesis anywhere that Jacob had to war with people and fight battles to conquer some land, particularly from the Amorites. So it may be that it's something that's just not captured for us, and Jacob is referencing now and stuff, but probably not. In fact, most have come to believe, or at least many have come to believe, that Jacob probably had to, at some point in his life, re-exert his ownership of the land which he purchased from the king of Shechem. Remember, in Genesis chapter 33, in verses 18 through 19, we read, and Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. This is after he left Padan Aram, which is in the land of Canaan, and on his way to Padan Aram. And he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he pitched his tent. Now in Joshua chapter 24, verse 32, we read, as for the bones of Joseph, which the people of Israel brought up from Egypt, they buried them at Shechem in the piece of land that Jacob bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. It became an inheritance of the descendants of the family of Joseph. But lastly, in the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verse 5 and 6, we read, so he, this is Jesus, came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. Well, that's when the whole story with the woman at the well takes place. And it's this land on which that well apparently sat that at his dying days, Jacob gives to Joseph as his sole giving to Joseph. Hey, I bought this land. I personally bought it. So God has promised us the whole promised land, but I bought that land, and so I'm giving that to you. And that ultimately is the land where Jesus led that first Samaritan woman into enlightenment, into understanding of who he was at the well, the famous woman at the well. Now that concludes 49, and like I say, it's the beginnings of the blessings. It's the acknowledgement that Joseph gets the birthright. That's how his sons Ephraim and Manasseh become part of the 12 tribes. Now, when it comes to tribal allotment 400 years from now, because Levi, the tribe of Levi, does not get a land allotment because they're the priests, Okay, there are only 12 tribes that get land allotments. Okay, so it does get a little confusing at times, but that's where it all comes from. And it's interesting that in his prophecy, he's got so much spiritual truth in there that we see Jacob is really speaking as a man of God now, on behalf of God. And we start to see him prophesying the future of Israel. Any questions or comments here? Maya, anything from you?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Anyone want to close us in prayer? Okay. Father, we do, as we started, thank you. Help us to glory in who you are, acknowledge you and have joy in you, make you known, and celebrate who you are and all your goodness. And we look at this life of Jacob, a man who had so many difficulties and rebelled against you and fought against you for so long, and you never gave up on him. And you've turned him into a man of God. You've turned him into a man who could speak on your behalf, a man who has come, even though it took a long time, a man who came to a point where he could trust you and you would use him to speak on your behalf, to prophesy for the future of your nation of Israel. And we pray, Father, that in this we would see, the promises and the hope that you've given us, and the assurance that your word, your promises to us through Jesus and through the apostles and the writings in the New Testament and your promises to the church are so very much alive, even if we don't see them happening right now, even if they don't seem to be present today in our lives, knowing that it's just a matter of time. Yet today, our desire may not be here. Maybe Joseph, our son, our kids, or maybe they're not with you, maybe they're not following you, maybe whatever it is we really need isn't here. But you know what? We know your plan is good. We know your plan will never fail. And we know that your plan is for our best and that it will come to pass because you have ordained it to be so. So help us to celebrate you, to worship you, and make you known. And it's in Jesus' mighty name we pray these things. Amen.